Savanthood. I don't know, I'm already over the city. Billiam tossed the comment away like a piece of gum as we walked through Chicago. You moved here 2 weeks ago. Yeah, Billiam mused, as if 2 weeks were enough to entirely consume and digest a massive city like Chicago. But I don't think I'll be able to do 2 years here. I suggested 3 years, which caused him to pucker up in horror. I definitely couldn't do 3 years. Billiam gasped, as if instead of sentencing him to a fun life in Chicago, I was condemning him to a Peruvian jail cell with no temperature control and a perpetual flow of men. The temperature control would be problematic. Billiam liked controlling his environment, like how a business executive controllingly trimmed their bonsai plant. But I doubt Billiam would hate the men. Billiam found himself moving to Chicago after 2 years in Austin. He's the first person to admit that he quickly becomes bored with a city. He has lived in stunning American cities and even internationally for time gaps. But Billiam was horrified by the idea of being stagnant in a town. When it came to city-dwelling monogamy, Billiam was not one to commit. Well, after Chicago, where do you go? I questioned. I guess New York, Los Angeles, maybe London, Paris, Tokyo? Billiam has never shown interest in New York and Los Angeles, and if I had to bet where he was going to go next, it was London. Billiam prided himself on his ability to change with cities. He wore cities like fancy coats before depositing them off at the local charities after their fashion had gone out of vogue. Mint was so last year. I thought about Billiam's preference of phoenixing himself into a new city every 2 years. It seemed exciting and luxurious, but was it possible to fully experience a large city in such a short time? And wouldn't Billiam run out of big metropolises before he turned 40? I enjoy the benefits of living in Cleveland while being able to travel quickly to more expensive cities like Toronto and Chicago. Meals that cost $30 in Chicago or Toronto would cost $15 in Cleveland. I get a bit of a thrill when I tell Chicagoans how cheap my mortgage is. I never fail to receive gasps of astonishment. They'd ask about the culture in Cleveland, and I'd have examples of districts, festivals, shops, and scenes that would leave even the most hardened Torontonian and Chicagoan impressed. Billiam had no desire to ever relocate back home again. If I had grown up in a small town away from the world, I could imagine the desire for Chicago, New York, and Toronto. But from a young age, I'd always been active in the downtown Cleveland scene. My high school was blocks away from West 25th, a Cleveland staple, and my involvement in programs and services had me active in institutions and organizations that dotted the downtown. Our conversation about cities occurred during a Labor Day weekend hangout. Billiam had invited me and 2 others to share his 1-bedroom apartment in Chicago for the weekend. The projected vibe was fun and boozy, a celebration and vacation. Billiam had just moved, I was starting a new job, John was returning to Chicago for the first time since pre-COVID, and Colin, well, he was excited to drink. John and I powered through a Friday afternoon drive from Cleveland. Our arrival was met with Billiam's demands that we start drinking immediately. I have to get ready, I exclaimed, tossing my luggage open and pulling clothes out like a maniac. So get drinking. Billiam made a chop-chop motion with his hands, like I was being paid on the clock to work and was moving too slowly. The group included me, the artistic philosopher who enjoyed a good conversation, Billiam, the social media guru with a taste of luxury, John, the smart preppy one with a well of conversational topics, and Colin, the subdued guy next door with a flair for fun and charm. Together, we were like the Golden Girls of Chicago, except probably too much to air for cable television. Netflix or Hulu, if you're reading this, I can field your calls on bringing this show to life. Billiam lived north of downtown in a district called Boys Town, which sounds like a lousy musical that couldn't make it onto Broadway. Boys Town was filled with cute, gentrified goodies like Juice RX, Sugar Daddy's Bakery, and Experience. There were glimpses of the old rough-and-tumble Midwest in convenience stores and businesses with battered exteriors but phenomenal products like a secret Cadbury interior. As we crossed nighttime Chicago to hit the bars, I couldn't help but absorb the city. Quite often, media outlets like to paint Chicago as rough and downtrodden, but my night journey was a glimmer of an urban utopia. I felt like a grown-up version of Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. Who needs Kansas when you can have this? The first bar we went to was called Sidetrack, where each room donned a different aesthetic involving neon, fake turf, and sporting equipment. The name must have been inspired by the sidetracked decor. I ran into an old classmate, not his real name Terry. Terry was at the bar with his boyfriend, and we slid into a comfortable remembrance. "You owe me your music career," Terry pointed out. "I was the one who gave you your first name." I laughed in agreement. Terry and I had this awfully bitter man for an English teacher, as well as a very stern, but in my opinion, lovely biology teacher who gave me a probably undeserved B in his class. Terry and I continued to catch up, and I felt powerful emotions. It was like finding out your favorite character got a good ending at the show's end. High school had been burdensome, so seeing people thrive in their post-school life was beautiful. The tranquil recollection was quickly cut short due to Billiam, who had been vaping on the outdoor rooftop patio. The busboy passed by Billiam and picked up the table's prominent "no vaping" sign. The sign had been 3 feet away from Billiam the entire time. The busboy held the sign in a tone that read, "Are you stupid?" Billiam believed the busboy was a friend of the group and decided to, jokingly, take a hit and blew the smoke in the busboy's face. It was a moment that made my blood freeze and my brain implode. "That's it, you're out of here." The busboy immediately went from 10 miles per hour to 100 miles per hour. The busboy had probably been too nice to people in the past. We witnessed a newly minted man who had vowed to never be taken advantage of again. There had perhaps been an incident that mirrored Billiam's behavior, which had previously been the busboy's reason for his lost faith in customers. "Are you serious? I thought you were joking." Billiam looked around to see if we would say anything in his defense. We all turned, sipping our drinks in silence. Even Terry and his boyfriend eyed the walls as if we were at an art gallery. Not that I've seen art hung up on the ceiling before. This moment could only be best described by memes of drag queens and Real Housewives who would sit in silence to avoid the hanging question. One of the most significant bar rules was that you never aligned yourself with someone getting kicked out of the establishment. The only exception was if you were married to that person. But even then, why should you be penalized for your loved one's mistakes? I earlier had informed the group that I would pretend not to know them if they started a bar fight. The busboy dragged Billiam out of the club. I was glad that Billiam didn't put up much of a fight. Billiam is known for having spicy moments. Colin, John, and I eyed each other with half-full drinks. "We'll go outside after we finish our drinks," I suggested to a consensus. I was not about to abandon liquor for someone's personal inability to read a "do not vape" sign. Moments later, we met Billiam outside. He was more prickly than a cactus in a needle, porcupine, and tax store. "Let's go to Roscoe's," John suggested. "It was always my favorite bar." Roscoe's turned out to be my favorite bar of the entire trip. The front was classy, with luxurious velvet and dark black metallic tones. It was sensual without being explicit or too obvious. While the front kept it professional, the back room was a dance floor with a stage that resembled a boxing ring. It was the fashion equivalent of a mullet, crisp in the front, party in the back. Billiam was not happy with this place. He wanted to go clubbing and consider the venue a dive bar. At his insistence, we moved over to a third bar called Splash. Splash borrowed heavily from the aesthetics of Mattel and Barbie. Pink and turquoise paint and manic lighting splashed the walls. There was even a doll box perfect for Instagram. By this point, I was about 6 or 7 drinks in and was enjoying the night. I was surprised that John and I were keeping up. We had busy mornings and a long road trip, but we were now dancing and popping it in the back room of a dirty club. That night, I saw a flicker of John's true, unabashed self. It was like seeing hidden treasure unearthed before it was returned away from the public eye. "I need to take Colin back," Billiam said, pointing to Colin, who looked like a rag doll on weak puppet strings. We walked back to Billiam's apartment, and Colin almost walked right into the street. I was a bit bummed that we were leaving. I had a lot of energy that night. John and I had skipped an actual dinner and found ourselves craving a late-night snack. Billiam, worried that Colin would get hit by a car, decided to take Colin back immediately. "Give me fries," Billiam demanded as we momentarily separated. "Aren't you on a diet?" John asked sincerely. Billiam had told us many times that evening that he was cutting calories. He was like a South Carolina housewife trying to impress her husband. "I'll just have some fries," Billiam said with a shrug, as if fries had the exact calorie count and fat amount as arugula. John and I ordered quickly, more bent on getting sustenance than being picky. I got fries with my meal, specifically for Billiam to eat later. We sat in silence, not a bitter or awkward kind. At that moment, my poetic candor recalled the flashes of the free John, moments I can't find myself truthfully remembering or writing about here anyway. I wondered, what did John think of me? I ask this often to strangers, acquaintances, friends, and family. I am motivated by criticism, fueled by criticism, and ruined by criticism. I feel that I disturb peaceful moments by constantly ladling these burdens of thoughts. Should I get cheesy fries? John was eyeing the menu board with glittering eyes that reminded me of a panda who had found the perfect bamboo. Of course, I smiled. You deserve it. John ordered his cheesy fries, and I watched on with a subtle grin. So many people would have tried justifying or denying their cravings, especially gay men in Chicago. But there was a beauty in not even a response to the justification that cheesy fries were all right. And part of me was thankful that even when my artistic spatial mind errs on the side of emotional, philosophical stress, there will always be events or people that remind me to live simply in the moment. The moment was the superb late-night food on Billiam's couch. Billiam cleared out the fries quicker than spoiled, ungrateful children would clear out their parents' estate. By Saturday morning, I was already feeling the tired, creeping claws of a stormy night of sleep and the hurt from yesterday. I had slept like a leaf in a rapid river filled with rocks, and while that might sound peaceful to someone watching the river, I'll remind you that I am the leaf in this example. Billiam had demanded that we be awake by 8 a.m., like soldiers returning from war only to go back to battle. John and I were awake at 8 a.m., but Billiam had slept through his appointed alarm clock. Colin, who looked like someone from a do not drink PSA, was sprawled out in a discomforting sleep position. Let's go get coffee, John sighed. I'm awake at the time I was supposed to be, unlike some people. Remind me never to disappoint John. Ever. Last night before bed, Billiam had recommended that we do a Saturday morning walk and maybe hit a coffee shop. He had mentioned a coffee shop nearby called Intelligentsia. Phone and wallet in hand, John and I crossed a few blocks for coffee. I, the giant burly ginger lumberjack daddy, got my coffee with extra cream, while John went straight for black coffee, no thrills about it. Coffee, for me, was an art of flavor and enjoyment, while John viewed coffee as a utilitarian caffeination process devoid of hubbub. This was a good recommendation, I mused, while I sipped my $6 with tip cold brew. Shocking for Billiam, John joked. We left Intelligentsia and stopped at Walgreens to pick up essentials, water and face cream. John even picked up a few cheap razors. I just hate how my beard gets without shaving, John said, pointing to beard hair that hadn't even reached half a centimeter. I hadn't known John much besides an Italian dinner a couple months ago and yesterday's road trip turned dance party, and while I liked John, I think this moment was where I unlocked a vast understanding of John. He was here, enjoying a 3-day vacation to Chicago, and felt like he had no choice but to buy shaving equipment to tone down the 1 o'clock shadow growing on his face. We were quite different, and I appreciate surrounding myself with people like John, who like making solid plans and needed to shave the tiny specks of hair off his face during a weekend getaway. While checking out enough hygienic equipment to host a frat house, Billiam called with panic that we had been kidnapped from his apartment. We're fine. We're at Walgreens, I explained. Oh God, I was just so scared. Billiam sounded like a mother over the phone who was still potentially worried that we might have been kidnapped, but this time at Walgreens. Is Billiam scared that we were doing something fun without him? John mused at the register. Billiam and John had very similar mental modus operandi, strong personalities. The difference was that Billiam operated out of anxiety, while John chose to operate over self-preservation. This would eventually lead to a minor clash between them, and I'll admit, even I couldn't sit on the sidelines for that upcoming incident. What did you guys do exactly? Billiam asked as we returned to his apartment. He sounded like the woman in the television series who thinks her husband is cheating on her. We got coffee, I said, holding up my almost empty cup. We went to that place you recommended, John said in a simple add-on. What recommendation? Billiam's face broke out into his classic confused look. Last night, you said we should check out Intelligentsia, John said, a bit thrown back. Do you not remember? I absolutely didn't recommend a coffee place. I don't even know that place, and I don't drink coffee. Billiam stared at both of us like we were fabricating a story. You definitely said we'd wake up and get coffee, I said. That I remember. Billiam recommended Intelligentsia. How else did we know to go there? John pointed out. That was some excellent evidence. We had left Billiam's apartment specifically for that coffee shop and hadn't just randomly attended the establishment. The only person who could recommend a place would be Billiam. John had previously lived in Chicago for a hot minute, but hadn't lived in this neighborhood. The only suspect that would have known about Intelligentsia would have been Billiam. I don't know about this inner galaxy, Billiam sneered, purposely saying the name wrong, as if that made it seem like he was disconnected from the establishment. Billiam called it the wrong name, so he has nothing to do with it. The case is closed. It's called intelligentsia, I stressed, as if the whole point of the issue was Billiam's inability to correctly pronounce the name of the coffee shop. I don't know it. Billiam tossed his hands like we were asking for an alibi from a random day last year. I could tell that John was feeling a bit of heat. His face was beginning to show more flush than an MLB stadium bathroom. Billiam, you might have forgotten that you recommended the place to us, but you did, John barked, trying to offer leeway through justice and understanding. John's politeness was a thin layer of cellophane over a giant passive-aggressive casserole. It was his way of saying, "You're wrong, honey." And we love the place, so it's a compliment to your taste, Billiam, I chimed in, offering praise through luck and truth. I was definitely the good cop during this exchange. Billiam doubled down that he had never heard of intersection and how he doesn't drink coffee, so anything coffee-related was so off his submarine radar that the news hadn't come from his ocean. John and I pressed a little, but decided to back off and go hunting for post-night out ravaging. We attended a good brunch spot that was severely expensive. It was a place that donned simple foods with truffle oil and included kimchi and an Asian-inspired breakfast dish. I would have staked my hard-earned savings account that a white man obsessed with Japan owned the business. John had asked for a patio seating situation, which had me instantly worried about the onset of the sun. We arrived at a minimally shaded patio, and my psychic prediction came true. I ended up being face first in a sun that was taking no prisoners. While everyone else had shade and their backs to the sun, I allowed the sun to burn my white iris skin into my skull. I felt like a torture victim who was being slowly teased with heat. "Cheers for my dears," the server said as she popped by with drinks. After she left, Billiam turned to us with a shocked, delicious, horrified look. It was the kind of face someone might make when they are offended, yet excited that the offense had happened in the first place. "Did she say cheers for my queers?" Billiam questioned. "No!" John, Colin, and I shouted simultaneously. After informing Billiam that he had misheard and that our waitress wasn't attacking us with slurs, I went to find the bathroom. I left the sun-trapped patio and walked inside to find a door labeled water closet. I assumed that was a room where they stored liquid and soda station material, so I kept moving. On the other side of the restaurant was a second room labeled water closet. At that point, I tested the handle and walked into a genderless bathroom. I couldn't help but love and hate the ambiguity of a water closet. I understand labeling the space in a manner that welcomes all humans. Who among us doesn't enjoy the benefits of a solitude shit? But the title of water closet was too abstract. I don't think of water when I think of bathrooms, at least not in a direct way. Why not label the space as the refreshing room, the oopsie room, the number 1 or number 2 room, or maybe you've dropped something behind room? I returned to our partially shaded table to find a peaceful silence. Sweat trickled down my face like I was Elvis eating fried peanut butter in Death Valley during peak sun hours. Billiam, who believes that silence means boredom, decided to break the ice. "Colin?" Billiam turned his body like he was Oprah Winfrey, prepared to ask the tough questions for the viewers at home. At that moment, I wished Billiam was Oprah so I could ask for a car. "Colin, what's it like growing up in Idaho?" Colin, who had been looking at his phone, looked up at Billiam with a glazed-over stare. "Billiam, you're just asking that so we can fill the silence." Billiam was offended, but smiling as if he loved the accusation all the same. "I was curious, it's Idaho!" Billiam stressed Idaho as if it were Mars, or a dimensional distant future version of the real minimal Idaho. Thankfully, the food arrived shortly after that to minimize more questions about Idaho. After leaving the brunch spot, we passed by Intelligentsia, the coffee shop Billiam disavowed. "That's the place we went to," I said, pointing firmly to prove its existence to Billiam. "Oh, I have been there," Billiam said in a dozy recollection. A small word spatter rang out between John, Billiam, and me. We probably sounded like 3 large birds squeaking and shrieking in public. Billiam still didn't believe he had brought up insurgents, while John and I felt more confident in the truth than ever before. Dozens of strangers passing by must have heard some part of the argument over whether or not Billiam had recommended a coffee shop. "This is the dumbest fight I've ever heard," Colin said, hand to his temple to shield himself from our stupidity. It didn't matter who was right in that argument. Colin was the actual winner. Upon returning from brunch, I noticed John pulling out his credit card. "Buying something?" I asked casually, trying to look curious but not gossipy. "Yeah, a hotel room." John had slept on a cheap couch for one night and immediately decided to book a hotel room for the remaining 2 days. John spent at least $500 per night, which meant that couch must have been so soul-sucking. I'd rather spend a night in hell than pay that steep price. The sofa had been a test of suffering for John, so it was time for a hotel. "John does this all the time," Billiam told me later. "He's always booking a hotel instead of staying at the provided accommodations." Billiam told me how John once left a party to drive back to his house. The drive was an hour and a half away. The motivation to drive home came from the desire to sleep in a comfortable bed. There's been plenty of offers in my life where people have clamored to provide me with sleeping space, but sometimes you really want to go home to your own bed. While I was too cheap to relate to John's credit card statement, I could also understand John's desire to escape a tight place with so many people around. 4 people in a small apartment just wasn't optimal. Certain things, such as a private bathroom moment to oneself, was downright impossible. Nobody wanted to let loose when the other 3 could hear every second of your bathroom experience. "I want to be on vacation, you know?" John clarified this to me while finalizing the details. "I'm grateful to Billiam for offering his apartment, but I know I'd be happier booking a hotel. Besides, it's my own money." Billiam was initially a little miffed that John would not stay in his apartment for sleeping arrangements. Personally, as a host, if you're not happy with the accommodations, you are more than welcome to pay for alternative methods. After John checked into his new hotel, we stopped at the Chicago River for pictures. The streets were covered and surrounded by pigeons and tourists. Many adults were masquerading with their children around under the pretense of selling chocolate for various school causes. One kid in particular was a bit husky and told me and some other tourists as we walked by that the chocolates he was selling supported their basketball program. I was skeptical because the kid didn't look like he would respond well if I brought out a hoop and a ball. Once the kid was out of earshot, a stranger behind me muttered to their friend, "I don't think that kid plays basketball." I immediately spun on my feet like I had witnessed a hit and run by Tom Hanks. My face spread open like a Picasso painting as I sheepishly gasped, "I felt the same way." While the adults using their children for financial gain on the street felt seedy, the loitering pigeons didn't know any better. Cleveland pigeons are skittish, but Chicago pigeons feel like they belong at your table. When you reserve an outdoor patio table in downtown Chicago, you must add a +1 to your table reservations for the flock of pigeons. One pigeon was nibbling on John's leather shoe. Maybe the pigeon mistook the leather for food? Or was the pigeon so desperate for food that it tried the leather? Or was this an attack on John in demand for food? One of the gays at the table behind us pulled out a folding fan and clapped the fan so hard that all the pigeons in the nearby area flew away. Most of the restaurant patrons looked shaken, as if they had heard a series of gunshots or a giant crash. The fan did not do too much in the long term, as pigeons returned 5 minutes later. I had ordered the gyro on the server's recommendation, only to be mediocrely happy with the dish. It felt like a gyro that anyone could make, even myself. And that wasn't a compliment. John ordered a large hot dog and cut it in half with a knife. The same table with the fan-holding gay guy had all 4 members watching on in fascination and disgust. "Just eat it, it's a hot dog," the one gay guy cried out to our table. John did a politician's smile that was friendly on the exterior, but interiorly was a screw-you mentality. "We are definitely those types of white gays," I told the neighbor table, who cackled in delight. Any other time, he wouldn't complain about having that large of a wiener, but suddenly, at the restaurant, it's impossible. Moments later, they asked if we had seen Harry Styles, and other tables chimed in to talk about how hot Harry Styles was. Colin arrived, as he had been so far absent from the downtown trip. He looked only slightly more refreshed. For most of the trip, we performed Weekend at Bernie's with Colin's booze-soaked, limp body, but for now, he had decently collected himself. "Are you okay?" I asked as Colin nursed a beer. Colin's beer wasn't a fun drink, more so a potion to lessen the pain. "I'll be fine," Colin said, behind sunglasses that were shading eyes eager for rest. We made our way to London House for rooftop drinks. Colin was the one who pointed out that we only had a little time left in our schedule. "Don't worry about it," Billiam said, as he booked our name for a table. When Billiam says not to worry about it, that's usually a sign that I should worry about it. "We don't need a table," I said to nods from Colin and John. "I prefer to grab a drink and stand at the rooftop's edge to see the skyline." "Well, why not just ask for a table?" Billiam questioned, like he was posing a question of morality. To be or not to be a table. The wait for a table was 20 minutes, but 4 20-somethings in their quest for their next drink couldn't wait that long. Cocktails were $18 a pop, and between that and a tip, my credit card practically hit 3 digits in a single cocktail round order. The host escorted us over to an open table. I felt confident that we would have to order things at the table, which was confirmed when Billiam tried to tell the waitress we didn't want food. "You do know that sitting here means you have to order food and things?" the waitress said, with a soft look of displeasure caked across her face. We quickly ordered food and the second round of drinks to appease the waitress. "We're really cutting it close on time," Colin kept pointing out. The grand chef d'oeuvre of the evening was Billiam's obligations at a pub for the OSU game that night. Proud OSU graduate Billiam was making an appearance and dragging us along. It was the only rigid plan for the weekend. I had specifically bought a $15 OSU shirt for this event. Suddenly, we were running late, according to Billiam. Colin did a quick round of "I told you so" as we burrowed into an elevator. For some reason, the elevator kept opening on every single level downward in a nonsensical glitchy mannerism. From the 21st floor, we stopped on floors 18, 15, 12, 10, and 8. Every stop was more confusing and frustrating than the last. It was as if the elevator was getting revenge on us for hogging a table while paying for minimal food. John tried his best to help us find a train, but between Billiam's anxiety, Colin's hangover, and my non-confrontational nature, we appeared to be running in circles around downtown Chicago. Finally, we ordered an Uber while John headed back to his hotel. Climbing into the Uber, we started a somber topic, considering we were exhausted from an afternoon of day drinking that was about to vault into night plans. We talked about cheaters, cheating, morality, you name it. Colin had discovered that a friend was cheating on their boyfriend, another friend of Colin's. Colin had broken the news about the cheater to the guy who had been cheated on. This made the cheater pissed at Colin for ruining the secret as if it was a surprise birthday and not an act of adultery. I couldn't tell how the Uber driver felt about the topic. Had he heard worse? Was he not interested? Or did we enthrall him all the way to Billiam's apartment? We returned to Billiam's apartment and began pouring drinks and tossing clothes around like we were reenacting Sex and the City on HBO Max. "We're going to go out after the game," Billiam explained. "Then I'm not going to wear this OSU shirt," I said, changing quickly before the Uber arrived. Welp, there goes the $15 I spent on the specialty OSU shirt. I was already a solid 6-7 out of 10 compared to the gorgeous people of Chicago, and no offense to a long-sleeve OSU shirt, but that would not help my physical game. Another Tesla arrived as our Uber. Did people buy Teslas, realize how expensive they were, and decide to freelance as an Uber driver? The party was happening at an ordinary pub that was decked out with OSU colors and team jerseys. A welcome table had been erected in the front of the bar. "This is where you'll be." The manager walked us 5 feet to the table as if giving us a tour a la Pimp My Ride. "You can help people get raffle tickets right here." For the entire week leading up to the trip, and until I stepped into the bar, I was under the impression that we would hang out at a table. I thought this was a social call, something the OSU debutantes of Chicago did during a football game. I imagined OSU alumni tweaking their walrus mustaches while swirling bourbon over ice and saying, "Yes, how debonair." Instead, Billiam was doing some assistant marketing and events volunteer gig for the OSU Chicago alumni branch. I was considered one of the helpers at the table. Most people might be agitated to be hoodwinked into volunteerism. I wasn't salty because I knew I wouldn't lift a finger while letting Billiam run the event. Billiam began to unroll the ticket roll for the 50-50 while I played on my phone. "Which ticket do I keep?" Billiam asked, raising the roll of tickets as if it was the packet of Kool-Aid mix he wanted me to prepare. "Well, it doesn't really matter," I shrugged. "Maybe you can keep the side that says, 'Keep this ticket.' It would remind you to keep that ticket, you know?" And what's a 50-50? You don't know what a 50-50 is? Billiam gave me a half smile, half blank expression of silence that let me know that he didn't appreciate my line of questioning. Half of your sales go to the organization and the other half goes to the winner, I summarized. Oh, that makes sense. Billiam shook his head as if he had known the entire time and had been testing me. The manager of the bar came over to ask some questions. Wait, how does a 50-50 work? The manager asked Billiam. Billiam turned his face to me, as if I was about to speak about a tricky philosophical question like, if a tree falls and no one hears it, does it make a sound? The manager followed Billiam's lead, and suddenly I had two slightly confused people running this event staring at me. Half goes to the winner, half to the organization, I repeated, wondering if I was on candid camera. The football game started, and it was evident that John was going to be running late. Can you text John? Billiam asked me. He'll answer you. John replied to my text with a picture of delicious pasta and wine. He's on the way, I gritted through my teeth. As the game continued, Billiam sold tickets for the 50-50. Colin once again managed to become drunk on 2 White Claws. I don't physically envy skinny guys like Colin, but I am envious of their ability to become cheaply inebriated. We kept ordering White Claw buckets for the table. Nobody else cared to notice or was too drunk to see, but most of these White Claw buckets had lime White Claw. I had nothing against lime White Claw. I had 3 of them that night alone, but you'd think they would jazz up the flavors a bit more. Ordering a bucket of 5 White Claws and getting 3 in a distinctive flavor felt off to me. Had I been a server or a bartender, I would have probably tried to be more equitable with the flavor distribution. I mentioned this limification of the buckets to Colin, who drunkenly nodded. When I informed Billiam about the surplus of lime seltzer and the ratio of lime to non-lime feeling off, he stared at me as if I had just killed a dog for fun. Another weird observation that night was that the bathroom's lone urinal was under construction. Not just roped off with a taped piece of paper that said, broken. A handyman was fixing the urinal at 7 on a Saturday night. Saturday's prime time seemed like the worst time to tweak a urinal for the establishment and the contractor. Who wants to be down fixing the urinal bowl while tens of men come in to splash the toilet next to the urinal? This work could have been done during the morning or afternoon, or even pushed off till Monday. I kept this observation to myself, worried I would be judged for noticing such details. I had just been branded a serial killer for observing the massive influx of lime. On a personal note, I am glad that we are moving away from the mass walls of metal troughs for men to pee in. I prefer the sense of privacy and leisure between the urinal and myself. Later that night, I would try to pee in a urinal and found myself unable to do so. Oh, he had to heave it, a guy called out to me as I threw myself back into my pants to wait for the lone stall. I try my best, I sheepishly said, hoping God could take me right where I stood. I don't know why I sometimes bother to pee in a urinal if the bathroom is busy. I feel like an animal who can't perform its duties, a bee who can't make honey, a cow who can't graze, a man who can't pee in a urinal if other people are circling like dogs on a bone. Billiam will remember the most obscure parts of my identity in a way that no other friend can. Billiam met a girl exploring sub-dom play and enjoyed her time as an amateur dominatrix. You have to meet Matt, Billiam told me. He did his research on sex and stuff in college. Love and sex fascinate me, but even the deeper elements of communication, dating, hookup culture, monogamy, marriage, normative culture, kinks, and other romantic and sexual sundries. My self-appointed sociological independent study was about love styles and expressions. For my master's degree, I investigated attitudes between those who use dating apps versus those who don't. This woman explained how she enjoyed being a dominatrix. I don't think it's all of my identity, I just have fun with it. And the guy you're seeing now is into it? I questioned. No, he's the dominating one, she sighed, thinking back to her enjoyment of swapped roles. And I bet there's no communication, it's just an unspoken normality. Her eyes got so vast I thought they were about to detonate like bombs. Yes, that's what I love about LGBT relationships. There's so much communication involved. Way too much communication. And this comes from someone who likes to communicate. Sometimes it feels like we're preparing for a thesis with a list of bullet point check marks. Position. Cuddle position. Do you even want to cuddle? Kinks. Monogamy or poly. Open or close. Semi-open. What do you define a relationship as? It's healthy to lay this out on the line. but sometimes it erodes the human connection. Let's get to some of the more essential details after we've chatted for a little bit. Unless you're way too strict or uptight on something, that might be important to note. And yes, I'm shading gay men who refuse to do anything more than act like a product you can currently get at Target for $15. Okay, where is John? Billiam asked an hour deep into the OSU game. Billiam could be having tea with the Prime Minister of Finland and still be anxious about whether or not we needed dinner reservations at Subway across the street. He's probably coming. At this point, I believe that John might be out for the count. Pasta, wine, and a bath. Talk about the perfect Saturday night in. I was surprised when John arrived. The game was slowly coming to a grand finale. Upon sight, John and Billiam went into a rendition of The Real Housewives of Chicago, which caused me to act as a mediator. Colin was on the sidelines, drunker than an entire moonshine distribution center. I deserve some me time, John explained. I just wanted a nice dinner. I watched some tennis. You could have told me that, Billiam clapped back. I was worried. You don't have to worry. I'm an adult. You canceled your Uber. We got the texts. I shouldn't have filled you in on that Uber right then. John had texted us that he was on his way, but had canceled the original Uber. If this vibe will be the rest of the night, then I'll go back to my hotel. I sucked in my breath because John's threat to leave threatened my night out. John was my social buddy. I didn't know Colin well, so it made sense that Billiam and Colin coupled up on our nights out, while I spent the most time with John. Without John, it would be like trying to navigate space physics with the background of a space farmer. Billiam left the table to handle the 50-50, and I casually told John to ease up on Billiam. I didn't even know we were part of the marketing committee, John quipped, looking at our little table. Trust me, they can't afford my marketing skills, I said loudly, which got laughter from the table of girls next to me. The table gave me some of their spinach dip, so that was a perk. Our tab was apparently going to be covered, but it ended up not being covered. Don't get me started on that. Billiam returned, and John ran to the bathroom. I wondered if it was because of Billiam or a wayward pasta situation. Now it was my time to cool Billiam down. We just need to respect John's boundaries, I explained. Sure, he should have texted us a bit more about what he was up to, but it's okay that he's late. I just get worried, Billiam responded. I didn't worry about John. He was eating pasta in an expensive hotel. If there was anything to worry about, it was the wine pairing with John's fettuccine. I went to stand outside the bathroom to wait for John. John arrived in the hallway when Billiam swooped in with apologies. The two of them made up, declared we were heading out, and we exited the establishment. We crossed Chicago in the beautiful twinkling nighttime. I took the lead directionally, given my background with maps and diagrams. I talked with John about how proud I was of his progress, random drunk chatter with Colin, and got into a few, no, it's this way, directional moments with Billiam. We arrived outside the bar, but turned to find that John had vanished like a girl in a true crime mystery podcast. Where did he go? Billiam turned dramatically. I have no clue, I commented. John was behind me, and now he isn't. I felt like John had fallen in battle, and we didn't have time to mourn him. Instead, we had to continue our quest to get to Splash. I initially thought that John had climbed into one of the nearby bars for a quick break from the rest of the group. I just hoped I wasn't part of why John had to escape. Did John think of us as the Three Stooges? I wonder if he's been kidnapped, Billiam seriously considered. He was way too quick to pull out the kidnapping card. I doubt a kidnapper would be so bold, I shrugged. Maybe he went back to the hotel. We ended up back at Splash like a predictable Nicholas Spark movie plotline. Billiam continued to network in the city, quickly schmoozing with bar patrons. Hi, I just moved here. I work here. I do this. Billiam and I approach our social butterfly moments differently. Billiam feels like a mechanical questionnaire. He wants to find out as much as he can, as quickly as he can. Billiam wants to understand the gist, and refuses to entertain any rigmarole. He'll promptly pass up on you like yesterday's mint, but he'll linger if he can smell a possibility for connection. It's a bold strategy, but Billiam is a master at identifying whether or not he could be friends with someone. I don't initially assume connection or disconnection with someone. I'm intrigued by questions and motivations, and I look for tessellations within people. I'll hand over genuine compliments, ask them random questions, and hunt for quirks and unique stories like an ideologist truffle pig. I'm more motivated by people's quirks and remarkable stories. I wish I embodied more of Billiam's stylization, a bit more casual and quick. He is a bullet train, and I am an air balloon, and sometimes you want to enjoy the ride, but other times you want to get there quick. At this point in the night, Splash had turned antagonist on me. I had been chugging along for almost 17 hours, with only 5 hours of insufficient sleep. There had been no nap, 12 hours of booze, and too many altercations to keep it easy. I usually max out at 8 hours of drinking, so it was a miracle that I was still functioning. Dancing groups surrounded us as the DJ continuously played jam after jam. Had I been adequately rested, I probably would have kept up the energy, but I was fading like an 80s song. I felt like a grumpy cat who couldn't appreciate catnip. Even Colin, who usually seemed to keep up with the party, was retiring against the wall. His pretty flower self was slowly wilting away, as if planted far from the sun and given no water. The latter part of that metaphor seemed apt. The man needed Advil, sleep, and water. I hate being the first person to chicken out during a night out. I try hard to meet the expectations my friends have for evening plans. I feel like I let my friends down when I tell them I'm too tired to do something or to continue. But the second Colin said he wanted to leave, I took that opening and ran for it. "Do you mind if I stay behind?" Billiam asked after I conveyed that Colin and I were retiring. "Of course not. Stay behind. I'll take Colin home." Colin and I left the club and began the quick trek back to Billiam's apartment. "I don't think you recovered from Friday's night out," I muttered, trying to make sure Colin didn't fall into the street again. Art took inspiration from life itself. "I haven't," Colin confirmed. I wouldn't describe Colin as quiet, but drunk Colin preferred his simple slur of words rather than winding explanations. "I wrote a poem in Splash. Do you want to hear it?" Yes, when I'm bored or moody, I tend to write poems, even in the middle of a club on a Saturday night. There was no verbal confirmation from Colin, just an amused smile. Or maybe it was a, "oh, this bitch thinks he's a writer," smile. I grew to like Colin, but I can't say he was an easy read. Quite often I could read people like a restaurant menu. Some were a bit more complex, like a Cheesecake Factory menu. Reading Colin was like reading Beowulf. So I read out loud a poem to Colin and Chicago. "I glide between obsession and possession, for things I do not own and barely know, taking ink and splashing it into symbols I think are letters, forming languages I think others can read. The only thing legible is a sense of unsound logic reeking with desperation, smelling like rotted raccoon piss, decaying quickly under nihilistic sun. A bloody wound and a bullet make an assumption of a gunshot victim. But if you didn't witness the tearing violence, how does one be sure?" I finished reading the poem, and Colin, head nodding, spoke out a decaying, "Oh." I actually laughed out loud in that moment of levity. My stories are filled with fantasy and whimsy, my lyrics are stupid and sexy, and my scripts are comedic and sharp. But my poetry tends to key into depression, anger, sadness, disgust, and revolt. The poems tend to shock people, because it goes against the happy-go-lucky dancing monkey people see in me. But even the most optimistic people have tinges of sadness, slowly uncovering our veneer. I sometimes feel soft clouds of depression. They linger in weird cases, like when I'm not having fun, and I'm surrounded by people who are. For all I know, Colin didn't hear a single word of that poem and said, "oh," so he said something. Or maybe he heard it and didn't understand it. Colin might have listened to the poem, understood it, and found it terrible. Had the poem struck a deep chord within him? It's something so rooted and profound in Colin that tugging upon that vine would result in so much displacement? "Oh" was more manageable than admitting your body was a stack of books ready to fall. Who wanted to play with emotions when you didn't have to? I was looking for validation. I was fishing like your grandfather used to and still brags about, and instead of receiving anything constructive, complimentary, happy, or sad, I received a neutral "oh." I deserved such Switzerland neutrality. I had invited emotion into the mind of a drunk man who just wanted to sleep off vodka and dream of cute boys. I was the town witch that purposefully exposed the sleepy, peaceful town to all the terrible things happening outside their village. But I like to believe, the key word here is believe, that Colin was impressed to the point where words failed him. Even drunk and stumbling through Chicago like a three-legged kitchen table, Colin couldn't find anything close to his emotions in that poetry. But who knows? I'll have to ask him one day. Colin might even say, "Matt, I honestly don't remember that night at all." As soon as we arrived back at Billiam's apartment, Colin rolled into Billiam's bed as if preparing for his own funeral deathbed. It usually takes me at least 10 or 20 minutes to doze off, but I was unconscious in mere seconds. As soon as I laid down on the stiff couch, my body gave up. My body was an underpaid retail worker ready to shut the store down, locking the front door minutes before closing. Billiam stomped into the apartment around 2 a.m. I wasn't upset that Billiam woke me up. There have been many times in my life where I gladly sacrificed total comfort for the ability to save money. While John was spending money to have a high-end relaxing experience, I was willing to splash through a free stay if that meant a 2 a.m. wake-up alarm of Billiam stumbling into the room. "Did I wake you up?" Billiam asked, concerned. I imagined Billiam looking at me, my limp body curled up into a fetus on a couch, with my face buried so deep in a pillow you'd think I was trying to suffocate myself to sleep. "Yeah, it's okay." Billiam tiptoed into the bathroom, and I immediately went back to sleep. Moments later, Billiam screamed something like, "Hey, boy!" I remember turning to face him, still clutching the pillow I was burying myself in. "I'm trying to sleep!" I shrieked in an offended tone that reeked of an older privileged white lady. Billiam immediately pulled back, and I fell into a sleep that lasted longer than Friday's. The next day, Billiam confessed to me a shocking statement. "Oh, the guy I was talking with at Splash did not like you or Colin." "What?" I gasped. One of my most significant anxiety factors was not knowing why someone hated me. I could name a plethora of valid reasons why someone would hate me. I'm too loud, I think I'm funnier than I really am, and I'm sometimes a wise ass. I don't mind hearing that someone hates me, but not knowing why someone hated me is a mystery I can't let go of. I'm aware that receiving closure wasn't always possible. But could my haters at least answer a survey question or two? The worst thing is to tell me that you hate me sans context. "Yeah." Billiam's eyes were so broad, as if I had done something last night that was so egregious, it explained why a complete stranger would hate me. Did my mystery hater dislike people chilling in the back of the bar? Did he think I was being standoffish when I was in reality tired? "And he said that you and Colin were ugly." Now that I could get. I am an unconventional beauty. A ginger lumberjack tank with a great smile, a symmetrical face, and a pleasant personality. I wasn't for everyone, but those who liked the vibe loved the product. I was confused why Colin had been labeled as ugly. He was handsome in that Abercrombie model with the blue eyes way. He had light scruff and an exposed navel that could make Shrek eyes shrug and say, "Fine, yeah, he's cute." Why? I doubled down on my inquisition. Why did he hate Colin and me? Why does he think we're ugly? "I don't know, that's just what he said," Billiam said with a flippant hand. "Wow," I whistled. "I think that might make me a bit homophobic." "He was hitting on me, so," Billiam said with a jazzy shoulder move, as if we should overlook someone's nasty opinions so Billiam could have a date. "Don't worry, I blocked him already." Only one mandatory event was left in the docket: Sunday morning drag brunch. I was worried we might end up working the host podium instead of just attending. We were herded like cows into a giant hall with dozens of other guests. For $60 and a tip, you were treated to a full-out drag show, unlimited drinks for an hour and a half, and brunch food. The drinks included mimosas, beers, and well spirits with energy drinks, all strong enough to leave you stumbling outside by noon. The event was legal, but unlimited drinks that early on a Sunday morning should come with a mandatory "this is not advised" message. The server came over with an iced tea pitcher of mimosa alongside a whole extra bottle of champagne. "I brought over an extra bottle of champagne just in case," our server said with a mischievous smile. "Is that just juice?" Billiam asked as I poured and sipped on the pitcher of mimosas. "Nope, it's mimosa," I confirmed, eyeing the extra bottle that was more incriminating than when your illicit acts are caught on video. We ended up trying the watermelon mimosa and the tropical mimosa, both of which Billiam disliked. I mixed champagne, juice, vodka, and Red Bull, which made me feel like an actual booze garbage disposal. I'm not a binge drinker. I tend to drink heavy drinks moderately quickly. I could probably finish a Long Island in 10 minutes if it was an emergency, but it only took 2 or 3 Long Islands for me to feel the tipsiness and call it a day. Swinging down gallons of juice and champagne is different. It's a heavy lurch to the stomach and almost feels like you're flooding your body. I thought eating food would help my poisoning, but the food didn't seem to absorb much. The food included the breakfast classic combination of eggs, Costco-style bulk frozen tater tots, bacon, and over-fried French toast balls. The lunch component was a sad-looking plate of arugula over bread with chipotle aioli. The aioli was drizzled haphazardly over the plate, like an elderly driver who should hand over their license. I assumed this dish was to ensure this event could be denoted as brunch and not breakfast. People don't come here for the food, Billiam explained, as if the soggy eggs and brick-hard spears of toast decay indicated that the food was the main meal. Clearly, I said, still shuffling eggs down my throat like a pelican who was giving up on an unopenable McDonald's brown bag in the parking lot and settling for rotting fish on the beach. A few times I could feel my stomach surge with things making their way up my esophagus. I managed to force it all back down. Billiam and Colin were staring at me like I had cursed out the entire restaurant. If you're going to do that, you should go outside. Billiam couldn't even bear to bring himself to say the word vomit, and I'm glad he didn't. It might have made me upchuck over the unlimited mimosas. Once everyone had been primed with booze, the show was over, and we were forced to clear out so they could prepare for a second performance. We tried doing a bar after, but it was too early for people to be out. Colin, who was using his airline employment feature to get free plane trips, was worried that he would be stuck if he didn't take the 6 p.m. flight, so he left a bit earlier than intended. Billiam was a bit upset, but I related to Colin's anxiety over transportation. Colin had never gained back a second win this weekend. I guess it's just you and me for dinner, Billiam explained, unless John is around. I knew John hadn't left the city, but I figured John had plans to see friends. John had previously lived in Chicago, and I could see him fitting in various visits to friends he might not have seen in over 2 years. The promise of dinner was scratched out when Billiam told me we would meet his friend at Roscoe's. I'm actually really excited to see Roscoe's, Billiam said with an excitable grin. You have seen it, I pointed out. We were there on Friday, and you hated it. I did? Billiam paused, and I decided to avoid the issue. I didn't want a round 2 of intelligentsia. We trudged onward, back to the nearby bar district. Billiam's friends arrived late, so we got drinks and dance before mingling with them. It turned out to be a tumultuously emotional night for me. Billiam got struck by the bathroom monster and left me alone in the corner of the bar for a half hour. A deep wave of depression slammed into me. I reminisced about the times I had been left alone, placed in a corner, and subjugated. All these beautiful, happy people around me seemed like real-life social media. I knew they were facing their own problems and negativity, but I felt alone in a pit. This was an extension of yesterday's emotions. I was the only one not enjoying myself, surrounded by those who were. What was wrong with me? Billiam returned later, and I snapped. You left me alone, I complained, my face breaking out in rage and sadness. I was in the bathroom. I could tell that Billiam was thrown up by my 180. I have to leave. I am no saint. I stormed off, leaving behind Billiam, Roscoe's, and all the happy people. I was still determining what I wanted from Billiam. A text message explaining how sorry he was, being dragged along to the bathroom in the first place, something that proved he understood all the nuances I was exhibiting. Italian food helped me recollect the pieces. I joked for a second to myself that maybe I was hungry, but now a tinge of guilt was kicking in. Had my actions seemed rooted in some legitimacy? I knew my emotions were valid, but they were expressed messily. It was like performing Shakespeare with bad actors, ruining this poignant piece with subpar performers, and there was so much said. I threw issues like confetti, which Billiam swept up in his similar emotion. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. The apology was quick at breakfast the following morning. We had both woken up politely and had walked down to Excellence. And as I peeled back the poached egg on my Benedict, and as Billiam danced around his food like the pickiest ballerina, I began to do the challenging yet necessary work regarding friendship. I'm sorry about last night, I began. I should have, been better. It's okay, Billiam said, as if I had spilled white wine on vinyl flooring and not had an emotional outburst comparable to Vesuvius. I love you, Rebe. Rebe, a nickname that only Billiam uses, but a handle I like. It's quirky, it's artistic, it's casual. Last night, I spouted some sensitive questions, some out of line, but there are moments, such as when Billiam pulls his own personal nickname from me, that remind me that he is my brother. A brother I love, a brother I sometimes get incredulous over, but blood to me. Sometimes the closer you are to someone, the easier it is to fall into the light dramatics. Because you unconditionally love those people in your life. You love them so much you overlook most of their quirks or frustrations. You ease their anxieties, disregard your personal preferences, and even adapt like a koala in a jungle. With coworkers and acquaintances, you're painted up like a French madam, trying to act the most proper and collected for their sake. But for your friends, you wipe the makeup off, push your face forward, and say, I am what I am. And what we are is frustrations over expectations and social obligations turned hem and haw. We are too many drinks and too many slips of the tongue. We are lashing at each other and praying over the damage we cause. We are imperfect for each other, and we hope we can improve things. After breakfast, John appeared so we could return to Cleveland. I want to apologize, John began, immediately pulling Billiam into a hug. I think we both have different expectations of this weekend. Like a cheesy Lifetime original movie, there were hugs and promises of visits soon. Before I knew it, John and I were propelling through downtown Chicago, hugging Lake Michigan so close you could run into the lake in mere seconds. Something I thought of was how Billiam and I go back 7 years, exactly 7, I pointed out. Science says it takes 7 years to truly know someone. Did I feel like I knew Billiam? Did I even successfully know people who have been around in my life for a decade, 2 decades? Considering I still feel unconfident in understanding the vast abyss in myself, could I summarize another's soul? Now that you know him, how do you feel? John asked. I love him, I confirmed. I didn't love going out 3 nights in a row. John and I laughed, and the conversation shifted onto the new tangent I opposed. I sometimes feel, John began, pausing to think through the emotion, that I feel disconnected from others. Kind of... You feel elevated, I whispered, staring into the gray concrete blurring by, and not in a pretentious way, just in a mature way, John pointed out, like we're getting older. I was beginning to slightly discard the heavy drinking and partying lifestyle thanks to COVID-19 and my emerging adulthood. I still had moments where I wanted to go out, but I was beginning to feel different about what I wanted versus what I needed. I used to want to go out every single weekend night, and now I don't need that anymore. And sometimes, I don't know, John paused. I feel like I just need something more out of my friends lately. John went on to talk about a lifetime friend he had recently ended a friendship over due to feeling semi-excluded. His friend had new responsibilities and more prominent characters in her life, and suddenly he had gone from a large land holding to some farmland tucked away in the corner of her country. They can't be close to me anymore, the way we used to be. You feel like a supporting role, I commented, having felt that way before. I don't want to be a supporting role, but I feel bad. I want to reach out and apologize for how I acted the last time I saw her. But you don't want to reach out to reignite the friendship? No, just to end it better. Moments later, the conversation shifted again, and I cracked a joke with John. We're social savants. Savants? John cackled. Isn't that word like used to denote you are special or something? I Googled the definition, quite confident that it meant intellectual in a spiritual and scientific blend. Besides, I usually reclaim the first definition of words that get bent by society. It works then, John smiled. Did you get something in Chicago that you don't get in Cleveland? John asked behind sunglasses, staring ahead and singing along to a Faith Hill song. No, I quickly surmised. The novelty of the city was fun, as it is visiting every new place, but I get everything in Cleveland. I sometimes wonder what it would be like to reinvent myself, to vanish like some 1920s vagabond who could slip away from the world. I don't want to pull a Houdini. I love my life. I loved going back, John admitted to me, but it confirmed I didn't need to be in Chicago. I loved my time there, and I'll go back again, but I love where I am in my life now. All 4 of us took multiple lessons from that weekend. For Colin, it was probably something like proper rest and staggered drinking. For Billiam, I think it was something to do with managing expectations. For John, it reminded him of boundaries and confirmed that he was where he needed to be. For me, it was a lesson in the forgiveness of self and the forgiveness of others. It was a lesson I believed I would need to repeat like a mantra, perhaps even tattooed on myself as a constant epitaph. But if Billiam could forgive me casually over breakfast of eggs and ham, I could easily excuse myself. Forgiveness over how I treated people, how I treated the world, and how I treated myself.